He had a fictitious name, which was R.C. Christian.
Paine was clearly involved at some level with the secret societies of his day, as many of the founders were.
Standing on the highest point of Elbert County, the Georgia Guidestones have raised a lot of questions. The sponsors of the mysterious project are said to be an anonymous group of out-of-state Americans promoting the concept of the conservation of mankind.
On 3/22/1980, a puzzling granite monument with mysterious origins was unveiled to the public. 2 years after C-19, it was destroyed on 7/6/2024.
You need money to build this?
No, I have the money.
What I need is discretion.
All 13 clocks must strike at the same second.
Previously in 24.
When Masons came to America, they practiced their trade in the same way they had in Europe, embedding secret codes within the design and foundation of the American colonies.
All the great cathedrals of Europe were built by stonemasons who had an understanding of esoteric lore. And they're basically riddles in stone, riddles in stone, riddles in stone.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America?
I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
One summer day in 1979, a well-dressed, articulate man arrived in Elberton, Georgia, from out of state. The man was looking for a capable granite company to construct his design for a large monument. He was also looking for a plot of land to place it on. The man approached Joe Fenley Sr., the president of the Elberton Granite Fishing Corporation, and inquired about cost and logistics. The man first explained to Joe Fenley Sr. that his design for a gigantic granite monument would be inscribed with wisdom for the ages, and that he and others hoped this wisdom would lead humanity into an age of reason. When Joe Fenley asked the man for his name, the bizarre yet polished man said he could not provide it and emphasized the importance that he remain completely anonymous throughout the process at hand. Despite the mysteriousness of the man and the unusual statements about a new age of reason, the man was educated, articulate, respectful, and had sufficient funds for the project. Therefore, Joe Fenley felt the man was a serious person and agreed to build it. Fenley even went as far as to put him in touch with his personal banker, Wyatt C. Martin.
How can I help you? Yeah. We can be discreet.
You can be discreet. No one else can ever know who I am.
So, who are you?
As things moved along, there came a point when Granite Company President Joe H. Fenley Sr. and banker Wyatt C. Martin both took an oath with the mystery man to never reveal any details about his identity. Ultimately, only the banker Wyatt C. Martin learned the man's legal name, and only because of banking laws. Wyatt C. Martin ended up serving as the intermediary for the project. What the mystery man did provide to both men and the local community was a pseudonym, R.C. Christian.
Elberton granite businessman Joe Fenley was contacted to build the project by a man using the fictitious name of R.C. Christian.
R.C. Christian said he belonged to a group of discreet, loyal Americans who helped design and fund the project, and claimed that the name itself was a representation of his own beliefs. But more insight about the meaning of R.C. Christian later. R.C. said that over many years, this private group put in careful thought about the design, principles, and overall approach to making their vision materialize, and all while remaining anonymous. The monument consists of 4 large upright granite stones, each standing at 19 feet and 3 inches tall. The 4 main granite slabs were aligned with the celestial poles. The stones were designed to function as a compass, a calendar, and a clock. The center stone was drilled in a way so that the rays of the sun would mark the time of day and convey what season it was. The center stone has an eye-level hole oriented with the North Star and slit aligned with the sun's solstices and equinoxes. Most significantly, R.C. Christian explained to Joe Fenley Sr. and Wyatt C. Martin that there would be 10 principles carved in the stone. The number 10 may have been inspired from the biblical 10 Commandments. He stated these principles were very carefully worded by him and his discreet group, and they intended them to be an appeal to all humans, regardless of race, nationality, religion, or politics. So much so that the principles would be inscribed on the stones in 8 different languages. Additionally, sandblasted along the square capstone sitting atop the structure was the basic message, "Let these be guidestones to an age of reason." Written in Babylonian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Sanskrit, and Classical Greek.
Over 951 cubic feet of granite make up the 11 pieces of the monument.
The unveiling ceremony continues the trend of intrigue and mystery. Congressman Doug Bernard Jr. helped unveil the Guidestones on March 22nd. Out of all the dates of the year, the unveiling of these stones, bolstering very particular principles, was unveiled on March 22nd. Now, this could be because March 20th and March 21st are when the vernal equinox occurs, which marks the beginning of spring in the northern hemisphere. Although the ceremony did take place on the 22nd, it was possibly because the 22nd fell on a Saturday, which made more logistical sense for a ceremony. Another possibility is even more interesting. March 22nd is 322 or 322. One of the most powerful private groups on the planet is the Order of 322, more commonly known as the Skull and Bones Society. Whether or not this group exists is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact.
The best-known bonesman is ex-President George Bush, who, according to tradition, is supposed to avoid admitting he's a member, even when the question comes in the Oval Office.
Mr. President, are you a member of Skull and Bones?
The Order of 322 is a fraternity that started at Yale University in 1832. Once you're in, you serve the interests of the group for life. Interestingly enough, the interests of the group are sometimes also the interests of the United States. This powerful club only permits 50 new members per year, and many of them rise to powerful positions in intel agencies, politics, and influential positions in the business world. It is said that the CIA is like a Skull and Bones class reunion. Perhaps what can't be spoken about and achieved through formal means is discussed privately and executed informally through unofficial means.
The core, as you go through the early 20th century, is comprised of 15 or 20 families, partially from old line American families going back to the Pilgrims, and partially from money, banking money, that came up through the late 19th century. Everything about them reflects this symbolic hidden meaning. Everything they do reflects a hidden meaning.
They are still the representatives of a long tradition, a 1,000 years tradition, from the Knights Templar through the Illuminati, through the Masons, through the Puritan families, and all of those families that went to Yale, founded Yale, and have used Yale to become powerful.
It still exists. The thing is so secret that I'm not even sure it still exists. Record that as the most unusual question I've ever been asked in my entire life.
The next question in many minds is likely, well, this random monument was unveiled by a politician. It was presented on March 22nd. So was this unveiling ceremony a symbolic gesture by the Skull and Bones Society to convey that they were the private group behind the monument and its statements? And that may be a fair question. The 10 guidelines on the Georgia Guidestones are the following. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, and love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. Now, there is an abundance of meaning for most of these 10 principles. There are 3 contextual items we must consider when pondering the meanings of these principles. One is the fact that they were written amid the Cold War, a time of high concern of nuclear conflict and planetary disaster. 2 is decades worth of speculation that the Guidestone principles are ideas or proclamations from those in the shadows and political spotlight alike who are purportedly laboring discreetly to usher in some kind of unprecedented new world order.
A new world order can emerge, a new era.
3 is how 6 years after the Georgia Guidestones were unveiled to the world, a man with the pen name Robert Christian published a book titled Common Sense Renewed, which goes into depth about the intended meaning of the principles inscribed on the granite tablets. The title Common Sense Renewed is a reference to American founding father Thomas Paine's influential pamphlet Common Sense, which would go down in history as the first viral mass communications event in America. Common Sense was published anonymously in 1776 and advocated for independence from Great Britain, which significantly helped sway the opinions of the 13 colonies to support the American Revolution just as it was beginning. Benjamin Franklin met Thomas Paine in London in 1774. Franklin encouraged Paine to move to America for better opportunities and even provided him with a letter of recommendation. Franklin highly encouraged Paine to write down his social and political ideas, which led to Paine writing the pamphlet Common Sense, which turned out to be an immediate cultural sensation. Common Sense was strategically written in plain and simple language so it could reach as broad of an audience as possible. Sound familiar?
It was Franklin who got Paine here into America and then helped him and encouraged him to write Common Sense, which he did. And he penned it and published it anonymously, so nobody knew who it was. And then they found out later on that it was him, and of course he becomes very famous. If you study historians relate that the pamphlet Common Sense was the writing that brought about the Declaration of Independence. In fact, Thomas Paine uses that phrase in Common Sense.
Paine wrote that nothing can settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration for independence.
It's fascinating that the American Revolution began in 1776, the same year that Order of the Illuminati was created by Adam Weishaupt. The Illuminati is an organization which aimed to bring about Enlightenment ideals, rational thought, and separation of church and state through covert influence on political and social matters.
The Illuminati was founded in 1776, the same year the Declaration of Independence was set forth in America.
No longer are we going to take the orders of the monarchs in 1776. Now that's a pretty important date, isn't it? It's too direct and too precise not to know that these people who envisioned such a new world were actually combined in the underground secret societies of Europe. The Illuminati and Freemasonry were the real forces of the spreading of democracy in the world.
The Illuminati, an organization founded by a man named Adam Weishaupt in 1776. The connection of this group with Freemasonry is acknowledged by even the highest levels of Masonry today.
The Illuminati was an organization created in Bavaria. A Freemason named Adam Weishaupt created the Illuminati as an inner circle of Freemasons. And he was very definitely taken by the period of the Enlightenment. He saw liberal democracy and liberal government, not liberal in the sense that we use it today in political talk, but liberal in the sense of giving rights and freedoms to the citizen as an important way to improve the world. And his plan was to create this inner circle of Masons called the Illuminati. That means the enlightened ones. And that this inner circle of Freemasons would then spread out among Masonic lodges, and then the Masons in turn would see to it that their members were put in prominent positions in government, and that then the Illuminati's influence would enable the liberal democratic principles of the Enlightenment to be spread throughout the world.
But was there a connection between Paine and the Illuminati? The answer, eventually, is yes. Paine was brought to England by Benjamin Franklin, who was involved with a number of secret societies in America and Europe. Franklin was the master of the lodge in Paris, which was the epicenter of Illuminati activity in France. It was Franklin who encouraged Paine to write Common Sense, which was published after Paine was in America for less than a year, almost as if it were part of a greater plan. Then we read this from Dr. James Billington, who writes that Thomas Paine lived in a menage a trois with Nicholas Bonneville and his wife from 1797 to 1802. Billington goes on to write that Paine's roommate, Nicholas Bonneville, was directly involved with the Bavarian Illuminati.
So there you have a direct link between a member of the Illuminati and Thomas Paine, the man who specifically inspired the American Revolution. So don't let anybody tell you that there's no connection with the Illuminati.
To review, R.C. Christian decided to name his book after another book authored by a member of the Freemasons and the Illuminati. Also remember the number 76, which could be esoterically understood as 7/6 or July 6, was when the unknown operative, who technically could be a member of any group or society, detonated the bomb at the Georgia Guidestones on 7/6 at exactly 4:03 and 33 seconds a.m. Many of the granite workers who carved the stones, as well as the construction workers who helped install it, happen to be Freemasons. We learned this from the construction company owner and land provider Wayne Mullinex, as well as Guidestones caregiver Mark Clamp.
Joe called and said he wanted me to give him a price on putting a foundation in for a large stone. And I told him when I got home that I would look at his drawing and work him up something. During the meantime, he told me that this was going to be set down toward the middle of Georgia or below Macon somewhere. So I was trying to get a price put together for him in order to bid the job. Of course, when we got home, I went by Joe's office because we're have been close friends. We're in the Masons and the Shriners together, and we've been friends for years and years.
I will tell you this, all the men that were involved in this were good Christian men. All of the men involved in this were Masons.
The pages penned by Paine sought to inspire revolution. In other words, on a macro level, he was ultimately trying to help the first iteration of America evolve into a new order. On the other hand, R.C. Christian and his group weren't trying to inspire evolution in the traditional sense, but they were trying to cause evolution in public thought by persuading the people of the USA and the world to subscribe to their views. It gets more interesting. After the Revolutionary War, Paine wrote a second book called The Age of Reason, a phrase which is also a central theme inscribed in the Georgia Guidestones and in R.C. Christian's book. By reinventing Paine's title, Common Sense, and incorporating Paine's second book title, Age of Reason, into the stones and book, it seems that R.C. Christian and his private group of loyal Americans were trying to have a similar impact on society, except more so gradually, and certainly on a global scale. Let's think about this for a second. The highest form of flattery is imitation, and R.C. Christian copied or created a spin-off of Paine's book title, Common Sense. Between that and his writings, it's clear that R.C. Christian was in favor of an updated version of the order of both the United States and the planet itself. His writings make it clear that he wants a new world order with a world Congress to settle international disputes. Could he be referring to the Latin phrase on the Great Seal and printed on US dollars, Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means a new order of the ages?
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
Or could R.C. be referring to the vision that George Bush Sr. spoke of in his speeches in the 1990s? Or are those two items one and the same?
A new world order can emerge, a new era.
Also, it must be said that Thomas Paine's book, The Age of Reason, was literally a denunciation of organized religion, with a focus on Christianity. Paine challenged the divine authority of the Bible, arguing that it is a human-made document full of contradictions, errors, and morally questionable stories. Paine asserted that the Bible should not be seen as the literal Word of God, but more so as a corrupt book full of fables.
This thing sold hundreds of thousands of copies. The American people saw what Thomas Paine believed, and immediately they thought, wait a minute, Thomas Paine, he was close to George Washington, he was close to Thomas Jefferson, he was close to the Benjamin Franklin and so on. If this is what Paine believes, is this what the rest of the founders believe?
The majority of the people who were in the Founding Fathers were either deists, or else they were free thinkers, or they were Rosicrucians, or they were Masons, or they were all of the above.
Like many of the founding fathers, Paine was a deist. Deists believed in the existence of a supreme being or creator god, but one that does not interact or intervene with the universe or human affairs. Paine interpreted the universe as a realm governed by natural laws, which can be understood through reason, observation, and experience. He argued that true religion is found in the pursuit of knowledge, virtue, and justice, not in the rituals and dogmas of organized religion. Paine faced significant backlash as the book was highly controversial at the time and was even banned in some places. At the first glance at some of the data available on this topic, it seems possible that R.C. Christian could have been a Rosicrucian and/or possibly a high-level Freemason. Why else would he use the initials R.C.? But do R.C. Christian's writings on population control, which we will get into later, imply that he is not a Rosicrucian or a Freemason, but something different entirely? I don't think R.C. Christian was truly a Christian, at least not in the traditional sense, even though he claimed to be one when speaking with Wyatt Martin and also in Common Sense Renewed. Anyone who is truly a Christian would likely be offended by the decision to incorporate the phrase "an age of reason" into the project due to it clearly being derived from Thomas Paine's book Age of Reason, which denounced Christianity. I think R.C. began his life as a Christian, and then his views evolved into a larger and more diverse series of beliefs about Earth, the cosmos, and the Supreme Creator. I do think, however, that R.C. Christian did believe in Christian morals and values. I think the abbreviation of R.C. may have been chosen to represent the Rosy Cross of the Rosicrucian secret society. Rosicrucianism has roots in Christianity, but it incorporates a blend of Christian mysticism, Hermeticism, alchemy, and esoteric philosophy. Emerging in Europe during the early 17th century, Rosicrucianism is often seen as a secret philosophical society with teachings that combine Christian concepts with ancient wisdom and esoteric knowledge. While it shares some Christian ideas, particularly regarding spiritual transformation and the pursuit of divine knowledge, Rosicrucianism also diverges by integrating elements from various mystical and occult traditions, such as Hermeticism and Kabbalah. The Rosicrucian manifestos, which introduced the order, suggested an enlightened understanding of Christianity that emphasized personal spiritual development, the study of hidden knowledge, and the pursuit of universal truths. The symbol of the Rosy Cross itself combines Christian imagery, the cross, with alchemical and mystical symbolism, the rose, representing a blend of spiritual enlightenment and the divine. So while it was influenced by Christianity, Rosicrucianism also draws heavily from other spiritual and mystical traditions, creating a hybrid that stands apart from mainstream Christian doctrine. The United Nations is mentioned in Common Sense Renewed 4 times, and favorably so. R.C. points to reinvigorating the intergovernmental organization and establishing a world court and beyond. I found it fascinating how Wyatt Martin mentioned how some of the languages, especially the older ones, had been translated for R.C. Christian by the United Nations. This could provide a hint as to one of the groups that R.C. Christian was involved in or connected to somehow, or it could just be a coincidence.
Incredibly, the translations were mostly done through the United Nations.
We had a man who lived in Elberton at that time that was from Pakistan, and he was at one time a member of the ruling group in Pakistan, but people from all over the world would drift in and out to the big parties that he had there. And one weekend, the ambassador to the UN from Pakistan came and spent the weekend with them, and he called me and he said, maybe if you talk with him, you could get him to get these translations you need, because I had to ask him if he could translate them, and he didn't know all the languages. And I went up to his house and met the ambassador, and he agreed he'd get the translations done at the UN for me, and we got them from the UN.
So the translations came directly from the United Nations?
From the people there. They translated the English over. That we had a young Chinese person who lived in Elberton that translated the Chinese for me. Wow. The rest of them came out of from people at the UN.
It goes without saying that the globalists, or those who desire a single world order, would find many of the principles and thoughts in Common Sense Renewed very appealing. It gets a little confusing because on one hand he says he is a loyal American, but on the other hand he is calling for a new unified unipolar world order. Perhaps he felt the United States would lead this singular world order, likely exactly how George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush interpreted it. It is time for a new generation of leadership in America, Russia, China, and all the nations of the earth to join in cooperative efforts to establish lasting world peace. I am the originator of the Georgia Guidestones and the sole author of its inscriptions. I have had the assistance of a number of other American citizens in bringing the monument into being. We have no mysterious purpose or ulterior motives. We seek common sense pathways to a peaceful world without bias for particular creeds or philosophies. Yet our message is in some areas controversial. I have chosen to remain anonymous in order to avoid debate and contention. Stonehenge and other vestiges of ancient thought arouse our curiosity but carry no message for human guidance. The Guidestones have been erected to convey certain ideas across time to others. We hope that these silent stones and their inscriptions will merit a degree of approval and acceptance down the centuries, and by their silent persistence hasten in small ways the dawning of an age of reason. We believe each human being has a purpose and a significant place in the divine plan of the universe. The celestial alignment of the stones symbolize our need to be in harmony with eternal principles manifest in our natures and in the universe around us. Humans are special creatures. We are shepherds for all earthly life. We are players in the eternal struggle between good and evil, the forces which build and those which destroy. We must strive to optimize our existence, both for ourselves and for those who will follow. We appear to be the major agency through which good and evil qualities of the Spirit become active in our world. Within us, there are elements of love, mercy, and compassion. There also are hate, cruelty, and cold indifference. We appear to be the only agents capable of consciously working to improve this imperfect world. It is not enough for us to simply drift with the current. The rational world of tomorrow lies ever upstream. We acknowledge that our powers are finite and we can never grasp the true nature of the cosmos. However, it is likely that we will carry our quest for understanding to the limits our simple powers permit. Human curiosity will ever consider ignorance a vacuum, to be filled and a darkness to be illuminated. I have no pretensions to authority. I am a plain citizen without scholarly stature or political experience. I present herein certain views dealing with a variety of subjects. Some of these thoughts, particularly those which relate to my private concepts of the cosmos and of our role within it, may offend certain of my readers because of seeming conflicts with their own cherished beliefs and traditions. Collective human intelligence is capable of discovering acceptable solutions for the problems which confront us. We must work together to direct political and moral influences through channels of wisdom, not channels of brute force or ambition. Using common sense as our guide, we must unite with the entire human family in establishing a limited world government capable of settling international disputes through a system of law. We must establish as a parallel objective the building of an enduring balance between human activities and the world of nature. These will be first steps in creating an enduring age of reason. These essays are addressed to open-minded citizens of all national, political, and religious persuasions who are willing to review our problems in the light of collective reason. Let us end once and for all the ultimate abomination, war. Let us stamp out politically motivated terrorism and assassination. I speak as a private citizen of the United States, professing neither great wisdom nor prophetic power. I do believe that human problems can be solved through nonviolent means. The difficulties which hamper our search for peace are rooted in our natures. My personal religious beliefs are based imperfectly on those of Christ, as adapted to my understanding of reality. History is replete with human suffering, which has resulted from inflexibility of belief, especially in the areas of religion and politics. For more than 60 years, I have benefited from the American political system, which was built through the labors and suffering of our forebears. Some of my ancestors participated in the major wars which forged and preserved our liberties. They were represented in the armies of George Washington and of both the North and the South in the period of our Civil War. I voice my views from a sense of obligation to all who have helped to make our nation a stronghold for freedom and a home for democratic principles. We humans open our eyes and behold a universe with mysterious and vast dimensions which range beyond our understanding. Most of us are content to accept on faith the teachings of religious leaders that we are significant agents of a supreme being. We sense an obligation to live in accord with natural laws we discern in the world around us. We observe within our nature certain talents and a small degree of intelligence. We accept an implied obligation to pursue goodness and truth. Instincts acquired over 2 billion years of evolutionary struggle for survival live on within our physical natures. They impel us to continue and to further improve our own species. Inborn curiosity and dynamism stimulate us to explore our world, seeking out challenges and answers. Imagination and altruism inspire us to envision a future in which we will govern our animal nature and assume a guiding role over all living things in accordance with our best spiritual and intellectual capacities. We have outlawed the use of murder and violence in resolving individual disputes, but have failed to develop procedures to peacefully settle conflicts between nations. We cannot permit the present condition to continue. We must change our traditions, devising effective political mechanisms to control the conduct of nations is not an impossible task. It should be viewed as a scientific and social challenge which demands the immediate attention of the wisest human heads in all the family of nations. There must be alternatives to war, which will be acceptable to and welcomed by the mass of humanity. We must now make an organized worldwide effort to find them and to apply them to the affairs of mankind. This is the greatest challenge facing us in the atomic era. Open and verifiable cooperation between the major powers can provide a beginning of the coming age of reason. We must develop a new patriotism on a larger base that will reflect the shared interests of all humanity and all life on Earth. A World Congress of Human Reason can provide leadership in reshaping basic human attitudes. Its recommendations must reflect the collective common sense of humanity, tempered with appropriate respect for all religious faiths, our ethical awareness, and all our emotional and spiritual needs. A vigorous and ongoing World Congress can hasten the dawning of the era foretold by the biblical prophet Isaiah. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Here are excerpts of the 4 instances the United Nations is mentioned and common sense renewed. We have given token attention to this problem with the United Nations, but we have made it ineffective by permitting certain nations to veto its decisions. Even now, the world is weakened and disgraced by preparations for possible wars. We permit the threat of war to divert us from devising means for regulating international conduct. Meanwhile, we neglect to rationally attack ignorance, poverty, and exploding human populations, which causes enormous misery and threatens thousands of other living species. Nations are simply large groups of individuals. They should be bound by the same moral and social restraints that apply in interpersonal relationships. Let us join with Russia in establishing a World Congress of Human Reason, to be located in Russia so as to balance the United Nations location in New York. Let us finance it with funds taken from the military budgets of all nations. Then let us gather in its halls the brightest and best minds from every corner of the earth to concentrate on the major problems of the human family with absolute freedom and objectivity. We are in need of world revolution, but it must not be one of force and violence. It must be a revolution of human attitude, a revolution that will outlaw the abominations of war, replacing it with judicial means for solving international frictions, with decisions enforced by a representative coalition, perhaps through a reinvigorated United Nations organization. That peaceful revolution can begin with joint actions by dominant members of the world family to prevent the military forces of any nations from crossing the borders of another. Similar joint efforts can assure all nations the free exchange of goods and information throughout the world. No one knows which way human institutions will evolve in future ages. There is strength and hope in diversity, exploring many pathways in efforts to achieve our maximum potentials. It is time for a new generation of leadership in America, Russia, China, and all of the nations of the earth to join in cooperative efforts to establish lasting world peace. Documentary filmmaker and researcher Chris Pinto met with the Guidestones intermediary Wyatt C. Martin and persuaded him to show him and his partner a briefcase full of documents and correspondence sent to him by R.C. Christian. In the briefcase, there were multiple envelopes, letters, and a small package caught on camera. The small package from the Smithsonian was sent to a man named Robert Merriman. Their research connected that name to the owner of the publishing company that published Common Sense Renewed. Due to the age of Robert Merriman, the data indicated that he was not R.C. Christian. However, the other envelope showed a home address in Fort Dodge that was once owned by a well-respected physician named Herbert H. Kersten. They found multiple U.S. patents, including a rotary valve engine in Herbert Kersten's name, which confirmed the address for a second time. Lastly, they also found a political donation in Kersten's name that confirmed this was the address for the third time and conveyed the extent of time he lived at that home. In one of the letters, R.C. Christian said that he was 78 in the year 1998. This revealed he was born in 1920. Chris Pinto and his partner then found Herbert Kersten's grave, which confirmed he was born in 1920, which also confirmed he was the same age as the person who called himself R.C. Christian. It is highly likely that Robert Merriman and Herbert Kersten were the leading members of the private group of loyal Americans. Moreover, it's highly possible that the name Robert in the pseudonym Robert C. Christian was used due to Mr. Merriman's first name, Robert. Secondarily, the name Christian used in the pseudonym Robert C. Christian may have been used due to the meaning of Kersten's last name. In German, it means Christian. In other archaic languages indicates the same definitions as well as follower of Christ. The subject of population is the most controversial subject that R.C. Christian discusses in Common Sense Renewed. He discusses ideas relating to eugenics with selective reproduction and sterilization. Here are some highly controversial examples of R.C. Christian discussing dynamics of the population.
Was he then well known for his views about population control?
I think fairly well. Shockley is the name that I couldn't think of before. Nobel Prize winner.
Shockley is a reference to Dr. William Shockley, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who invented the transistor. In the 1970s, Dr. Shockley was known for his belief that blacks were genetically inferior to whites, and that those with an IQ of less than 100 should be paid to undergo sterilization. Despite his scientific achievements, Shockley's racial views made him highly unpopular.
And Dr. Kersten knew Shockley and said that Kersten, and he used to circulate this in the country club, which is how I heard about it, he had decided he would create some kind of measurement that would prove once and for all that only white people were, especially Northern Europeans, were the superior race.
And this was well known around Fort Dodge.
So would it be accurate to say that Mr. Kersten was a white supremacist?
Racist to his fingertips. When he did this at the country club, a number of people were deeply offended by what he was saying. He didn't have popular support at the country club, most of whom were well-educated people. Many of them were, well, somewhat multiracial or multi-ethnic, and they were not pleased, which is why they told me about it.
I'd like to begin by asking Dr. Shockley whether he has in fact studied eugenics in the sense that professors of biology have studied eugenics.
Well, Mr. Buckley, the studies available on eugenics have an interesting history. I did a study on the books on eugenics in the Stanford Library at one time, and this came up with a very interesting result. One of the plans I talk about is a eugenics measure, the so-called voluntary sterilization bonus plan. I have this voluntary sterilization bonus plan, and the way it goes is a bonus would be offered to everyone to be sterilized. The amount of the bonus would be dependent on various factors. For example, income taxpayers would be offered no bonus. For all others, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status, those were the criteria I put in, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status, the bonus would depend upon best scientific estimates, and that's a very important qualifying phrase, best scientific estimates, of any genetically carried disabilities. At $1,000 for every point you score below 100 on an IQ test, $30,000 put into a trust fund for a 70 IQ moron capable of producing 20 children might very well be economically advantageous to taxpayers in terms of about $300,000 in reduced costs of mental retardation care. And that's a very simple calculation.
I'll tell you something that would be even more economically advantageous would be to kill them.
Well, that,
Why
you
don't we
see,
just kill them?
that disagrees with my fundamental principles on this, Mr. Buckley, which I've had a try at
Are these scientific principles or moral principles?
These are moral principles, and I do have some elements in this which are matters of faith, you see. And
Faith in what?
Faith in man.
Dr. Kersten had even written a letter to a Florida newspaper expressing his views in favor of David Duke, a well-known controversial figure and former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
A letter that I downloaded from the Sun-Sentinel newspaper in Florida. This columnist is responding to a letter he received on an article he had written. It says, an Iowa physician, Herbert H. Kersten of Fort Dodge, reacted to my attack on those who attribute base sentiments to anyone who wants to solve America's problems first. He lulled me into dropping my guard. He said I correctly suggested it is not wrong to be patriotic. Then, wham, he threw in the incendiary names of Patrick Buchanan and David Duke, contending that they are among the few public figures who speak for American interest in this new era of internationalism. Duke, he said as my skin crawled, voices many beliefs held by reasonable Americans. It is unfortunate that more acceptable public figures are not pushing similar views. So, now David Duke, the one we're talking about, is the gentleman who was the Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
In his autobiography, David Duke referred to William Shockley as his friend. At one point, Mr. Doan even wondered if Dr. Shockley had been a member of the small group of Americans behind the Guidestones.
Did Shockley have anything to do with this directly?
Apparently, Dr. Shockley was also a friend of Dr. Kersten.
And I knew that Dr. Kersten and Shockley were friends.
And how did you know that?
Because Kersten told us. He was very proud of, well, the Nobel Prize winner.
In your presence, or?
Yes. I mean, he did not make it a secret. He was proud of it.
We can only wonder at how influential William Shockley may have been in the life of Herbert Kersten. Shockley's thinking seems to be represented in the words, "Guide reproduction wisely," which implies hindering the birth rate of some in favor of others, which was exactly his idea.
One of the interesting factors of this case is how various clues point us in different directions as far as the group or groups that may have been involved. When learning that the unveiling ceremony occurred on March 22nd, my mind went directly to the Skull and Bones Society. When hearing the RC and RC Christian, I thought it may have stood for the Rosy Cross and that the private group may have been the Rosicrucians. When hearing that the land provider and construction company owner Wayne Mullinex was a Freemason and that many of his workers were as well, I thought the project may have had ties to Freemasonry. When hearing that the older languages were translated by the United Nations and seeing the endorsement for the United Nations and a World Congress in R.C. Christian's manifesto, I thought the project could have ties to the United Nations. But after the envelopes in Wyatt C. Martin's shed conveying that R.C. Christian was most likely Herbert H. Kersten and coming to understand his ties with Dr. Shockley, it becomes almost certain that R.C. Christian belonged to a group that were total proponents of eugenics, which could mean that they were white supremacists. But could some members of the other groups mentioned also be white supremacists? All in all, our planet is diverse in both wildlife and human life, so one could easily argue that the Supreme Creator, if there is one, made it diverse for a reason. Headline Hunter Media hopes you enjoyed this documentary, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Now to a Fox Carolina follow-up at 7:37. This week does mark 2 years since an explosion damaged the Georgia Guidestones.
And still to this day, investigators have not publicly announced any suspects in this case. Back on July 6th of 2022, an explosive device was detonated near the Guidestones, which were located on Highway 77 in Elbert County. The explosion destroyed a large portion of the monument, and they were later demolished. Investigators released surveillance video from that night, and you can see in the video here someone run up to the structure before the device goes off. We reached out to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation today for an update on this case, and they tell us that there is none right now.
Oh.